tissue grows prenatally by laying down extra cells and making cells bigger, but postnatally, mostly what we see is that the cells that are there get bigger. We don't lay much new cell down when we're looking at muscle fiber, different to the skeletal system where we're laying bone down, remodeling constantly, right? Adult muscle has two major subgroups of types. Type 1 used to be called slow twitch. So they're the muscle fibers that are useful for breathing, they're useful for walking around, taking the dog for a walk, riding your bikes, right? And then type 2s are the faster ones, right? So they're more useful if I've got to do something suddenly, like stand up if the fire alarm goes off, or if I'm going to run, or if I'm going to jump, okay? And the type 2s are split mainly in humans into A and X, right? You might see some language about type 2B if you're looking around in the literature. Type 2B is now a type 2X. So if you're looking at something and it's talking about type 2Bs, it's quite out of date. Now they have found some other type 2 fibers in cats and rats and things, but to my knowledge we don't have a lot of information that they're readily there in a human muscle yet. So just concentrate on type 1 and type 2s. And A's and X's. The interesting thing about this different type is that when we're born, only about 15 to 20% of our muscle fibers have not decided to be a type 1 or a type 2. Right? So I can't do very much. By the time they're 1, children's muscle fiber ratio, how much type 1 and how much type 2 they have, is pretty set. So that ratio is going to be similar through to their adulthood. Right? And we get very little opportunity to impact that ratio. That can be important when you're teaching movement, because if someone is struggling with a particular activity or a particular skill, one of the reasons that might be is that physiologically they're not built to do that skill very well. Right? If you're looking at a jumping skill and someone has a lot of type 1 fibers and not very much type 2, then they're not going to be able to jump very high, because jumping involves contracting your muscles very, very quickly. Right? If I'm slow, I might be really good at running 2 or 3 miles, but I'm not going to be very good at jumping high. Okay? So it's an important point to pay attention to, because we get caught up in, everyone can jump if they try hard enough, or, give it another go, you can do better. Well, it might not be that they're not trying, it may be that that's just not a skill they're going to be very good at. Right? Our ability to do something is not something we have control over. As we get older, then even in people who are not very active, we don't see a lot of muscle mass loss until you get into your 50s. And then it's pretty rapid, let me tell you. It's a little scary. All of a sudden you get weak like overnight. So if I train, then we see even less loss, and we can maintain muscle mass into our 50s and 60s a lot better. So staying active helps us maintain that muscle mass. And remember, if I want to stay on balance, right, if I want to be balanced, what do I have to be able to do? Where's my center of gravity got to be? In the center, right? It's got to be over my base of support. So if it's tipping to the edge of my base of support, what do I need to be able to do? Adjust. And that takes strength. Right? So maintaining muscle mass is pretty crucial to balance and to being able to stay physically active. By about 80 on average, people have lost 30, 35% of their muscle mass. We can keep that number lower if we keep training. Typically what we see is that, particularly after 70 or so, if you live into your 70s and your 80s, then what we see is that the loss occurs both in the number, so we actually start to lose muscle fibers, and the ones we have get smaller. Right? And there's some question about, do we lose more type 2s, the faster ones? Well, that would make sense, because even if I stay active and I train, I still get slower. So it would make sense that the kind of muscle fiber that deteriorates first is the fast one, the type 2. Okay. And the research just says the more you exercise, the more you're active, the less we see this. Not that it's not going to happen. It's not like I'm saying if you exercise every day, you won't lose muscle mass. Right? That's not the case. You're going to lose it, period. That's just part of getting old. Right? If you make it to 70, if you make it to 80, then we're really not looking at, you're well past 3/4 of the way through your lifespan, and muscles, organs, tissues are breaking down at that point. The key is, can I keep it to the minimum? So, we mentioned a little bit on Wednesday, especially if you're going to work with children who are going into puberty or in puberty. If you're going to work with that age group at any point, you really want to pay attention to how do the two systems interact. Right? Because you're going to see movement in your PE class or with your after-school program or at your rec center, or even with, if you're working with athletes at that age. Remember that the skeleton is going to grow first. Skeleton grows first, and bone is heavy. Because the muscle is attached to the skeleton, as the skeleton grows, it yanks on the muscle, and that stimulates the muscle to lay down extra sarcomeres and get longer. Alright? The muscle will get longer before it gets stronger. So, I've got all this extra bone mass that makes my arms and my legs heavier than they used to be. They're way longer than they used to be. So now I've got to work out where my fingers are in relation to the coffee cup. And I'm not going to have the strength straight away to move that arm as efficiently as I could before it did its big growth spurt. So if you're going to work with pubertal age kids, all of that's going on, and it means that you're going to see their movement behavior. It's actually quite interesting to watch how quickly, how rapidly their motor skills change. What you see. If they deteriorate, they'll pick up again if they keep practicing, but now you've got to motivate them to keep practicing. Because it's a bit hard when you can do something pretty well and then all of a sudden you can't do it very well anymore. Lose a lot of gymnasts at that age. A lot of kids quit at that age because they're pretty good on bars and they can float up, start and cast a handstand, and now all of a sudden their legs are 3 inches longer and they can't do it anymore. Alright, so we've looked at the skeleton, we've looked at the development of the muscles, we're going to look at the development of the adipose system, so our fat cells. And prenatally, we lay fat cells down in the fetus, very rapidly increasing during month 8 and 9. So if you watch a woman who is pregnant, then if she keeps herself in shape, if she exercises, if she eats well, this bump stays relatively small, and then all of a sudden she gets to the end of month 7, and the next time you see her, it's out here, right? And you're like, oh, that was quick, okay? Because in month 8, that baby starts laying down fat cells like it's going out of business. Okay? Somewhere around 5 billion fat cells when we're born, okay, on average. And fat is a very useful tissue. It's a great form of energy for certain exercises, and it holds a lot of energy. A fat molecule has much more energy than a carbohydrate molecule or a protein molecule. So fat is a very useful energy store for people. It helps keep us warm, and it also has a protective role because we have fat in our trunk that is wrapped around our organs. That's visceral fat, and we also have fat under our skin that is subcutaneous fat. The visceral fat has a very big role in protecting your liver and your kidneys and your stomach if you fall or you get hit. Okay? So we don't ever want to expect no fat. That's not realistic, it's not safe, it's not healthy. We're not looking for no fat. When we watch what happens with fat cells, then from birth through about 6 months or so, we see a lot of fat cells laid down. So anyone who has a brother or sister or a niece or nephew or a next door neighbour to the baby, you know when the baby's born, they're quite little and scrawny, and then all of a sudden within a few months they're this round, chubby, right? They change quite a lot because they're still putting down fat cells quite quickly over those first few months. And then we keep putting them on, but it slows down a lot until about the age 8. Right? Then we don't put on a lot of fat until we hit puberty, and if we're girls, we lay down a ton more fat cells in puberty because the action of estrogen that gets released stimulates the laying down of fat cells. Right? We wish it didn't, most of us, but it does, and there's nothing we can do about it. Right? That's just the way it's going to be. Initially, what we see is growth both ways. Hyperplasia, I cells and hypertrophy. The fat cells that I have get bigger and we put more fat into them. Fat cells work a little bit like a balloon or a jug. Right? You lay the cell down. Do this. You lay the cell down. Right? And then you fill it up with fat. Okay? So, in adolescence, what happens, certainly for the boys, predominantly what boys do in adolescence is fill up cells that are already there, because their body is working on putting energy towards building muscle. Right? Girls, we still see some hyperplasia. They still lay down some extra cells, but there's a dramatic increase in how much fat gets put into the cells that are there. So the distribution changes as we get older. Where the higher percentage of fat is within the body changes as we get older. Right? So younger children, typically, a healthy, typical younger child is relatively slim, and most of their fat is stored internally, wrapped around those organs. When we go through puberty, then what we see is an increase in subcutaneous fat, which is the one we can see, right, when we look at someone. And the subcutaneous fat continues to increase in girls. One of the frustrating things, if you go on a, when you get married and you both go, ooh dear, we put on like 5 or 6 pounds this year, we better go on a diet, and you both go on a diet, and you're both working out, and you're both sticking to your nutrition plan, and he loses loads of weight, and she doesn't lose quite as much weight, right? Because genetically, he is supposed to be lean, so it's easier for his body to lose fat than it is for her body to lose fat. So, genetically then, what is supposed to happen is that from the point in time in puberty where we've stopped laying down fat, we shouldn't really lay down a lot more fat cells over the rest of our life. Okay. Clearly, when you look around the adult population in America, we obviously can continue to lay down fat cells, right? Typically, if you put on weight as an adult, what happens is you just keep filling up the cells a bit more, right? But this is not obesity. This might be a little chubby or a little overweight. But in order to be obese, you have to lay down a load more fat cells, right? So we know that physiologically it's possible to lay down more. That's not the typical picture genetically. So when we're looking at people, not everybody who is obese is this. There are some instances where there's some genetic issues that cause things to go wrong. But for most people to be obese means that they have stimulated their body to lay down a lot more extra fat cells than should have been there. Okay? So, when I lose weight, weight on and grown the fat cell, when you lose the weight, all you do is drain the cell. But the cell stays there. So, that means now that you've got a much better chance of putting weight on again because you've already got the receptacle to hold the fat. You don't have to build the receptacle. It's already sitting there waiting to get filled up again. So that's one of the reasons why we see yo-yo dieting. Because rather than changing permanent lifestyle habits, people overeat or are sedentary, go on a diet, lose the weight, go back to their previous behavior, and when you go back to your previous behavior, it just all fills up again, and you put the weight back on. And then you go on another diet, and you empty it all out. And then you go back to your previous lifestyle, and it all goes back. Right? So we can't, the only way to get rid of them is to do something silly like liposuction. And even that doesn't seem to work long term because people don't change their lifestyle. It's a quick fix.
Is that the only way? Working out won't get rid of it?
No, once they're there, they're there, as far as I understand. Working out stops you from filling them back up again. Okay. Eating well, exercising every day, making sure you're physically active, using a walking lawnmower, not a sit on my butt and be lazy and text on my phone while I'm cutting the grass lawnmower. Bad plan.
So say you're someone that's like really big and cut down, have abs, you know, really good, those cells are still there.
Yeah, they shrink, but my understanding is they're still there. But someone who manages to change their life enough to do that is unlikely to go back to the previous lifestyle to stimulate filling them up again.
Unless the doctor tells you you need to go back up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's what happened to me. I started out at 400 pounds and I'm down at 250. And then he told me I got down to 150. He told me I looked too sick, so he wanted me at 200.
Interesting.
What happens if you get too skinny? Like for like yourself?
For yourself?
Yeah.
Couple of things. Some people will indicate, especially if they cut fat down really minimally in their diet, you need fat for your nails and for your hair and skin, so your nails get very dry and might start to peel. Your hair gets very dry, very flat. Energy reserves are down, so that means if you get sick, it's much harder for your body to fight an infection or an illness. So if you get flu, then you're going to be in bigger trouble than someone who's at a healthy weight. If you're too low, so too low and being too low also puts stress on kidneys and heart. So being too low also has quite a lot of health issues. If you're not eating properly, then you'll start to burn muscle to provide energy. If you are not eating dairy foods, then your body will start to leach calcium from your bones, and that puts you at risk for your bones breaking and developing osteoporosis. So being too thin can be a health risk, but the risks are greater being too heavy. So my concern when we look at this picture is that when we allow children to become overweight, and increasingly we're seeing high levels of obesity amongst very young children, then the chances of that child really getting healthy become very, very difficult, right? It's really hard. because once we've allowed them to get fat, their propensity to put that weight back on, even if they lose it as a teenager, chances are they're going to have more problems keeping it off as an adult than someone who was never fat in the first place. Okay. If a child is overweight by the age of 8, then the research says they've got a greater than 60% chance of being an overweight adult. And there's lots of things that play into that picture. One is the physiology of fat. The more obvious one for us is how well does a child who is fat, think about an 8-year-old who is fat or obese, how well do they move? Not very well, right? So, I don't move very well. By the age of 8 or 9, I'm pretty well aware that I don't move very well, that other people are better than me. But I'm pretty good at reading, or I'm pretty good on the computer. So what do I choose to do in my spare time? Play on the computer or read a book. Not move. So now we've already created a problem. We've let them get overweight, and that impacts their competency at their motor skills. If my competency at my motor skills is low, then my self-perception of my ability to do motor skills drops down. And so I choose not to do motor skills, because why on earth would I choose to do something I'm not very good at? Right? None of us do that. We don't do it as adults very often unless someone's paying us a lot of money. Right? So why on earth would we expect a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old to choose to be active when they know they're not very good at it? So now we've got a bigger battle, because now they choose to be sedentary, and that just feeds the cycle. So we've got to find a way, we've got to find something they like doing. So there are some programs out right now. I saw a little clip, there's a documentary coming up in March online on one of the online TV stations, shows, whatever you call them. And they're following 4 children who are overweight. And one of those is a young black girl. And it's really cool because she loves Beyonce. And so what the teachers have done is they put Beyonce on, and she likes to dance. So they just put Beyonce on all the time and get her to dance all the time, because that's the only, that I can get her to do, because that's what she likes to do. And what you've got to do is teach them the habits, because if they get the weight off, the only way now to keep it off is to stay active and to eat well, not eat Cheetos in front of the telly, watching Beyonce. So it's a big problem. And as the PE teacher, you're going to more and more, unless you only work with competitive athletes, you are going to more and more have to deal with young children who are overweight. So you've got to start thinking, well, what can I do? Right? We have to tackle it on 2 fronts. We can't only get them physically active, because that doesn't improve their motor skills. I have to get them more competent. Their motor skills have to be good. They have to be confident that when you say run, they can run. When you say catch a ball, they can catch a ball. So you have to work on competency in order to work on physical activity. So this is why I think it's important to work with the young children. Because we can get them at 3, 4, and 5. We can get them relatively competent. By the time they're 5, then chances are, hopefully, that they're going to build on that in kindergarten and in elementary school. and they're going to enjoy moving. The younger we can get them moving, remember their fundamental motor skills should be relatively competent by the time they're 5 or 6. So jumping, running, catching, throwing, hopping, skipping, they should be pretty good at those by the time they go to school. If we could really get that picture, we could help this out quite a lot. So the question is, how do we help that picture? So as we get older, males and females show this tendency, we will tend to put on a little bit of weight each year as we get older, right? That doesn't have to be the case. That is lifestyle, that is not genetics, all right? It's just that we get busy. It's quicker to run through the McDonald's drive-thru than it is to go home and cook a meal. Or it's easy to say at the end of the day, well, I've been in the office for 10 hours and I'm really tired and I'm going to go home and have a beer, I'm not going to go to the gym. Or I've got to get the kids to school and then I have to go get the shopping and then I have to pick the kids up from school and then I've got to sit with them while they do their homework and all of which means you don't get to do your exercise session. So it's really hard not to put on a little bit of weight every year. And before you blink, that little bit of weight every year, 10 years down the line, is quite a lot of weight. As we get much older, so once we get to retiring and we're looking at the elderly, then we see if they're not moving and they're still eating a lot of calories, we'll see some trunk fat, so visceral fat still gets bigger, but their subcutaneous fat tends to decrease. Right? So when you look at little old ladies or little old men in their 80s, they might have a round tummy, but they've got these little bony, thin arms and legs. Makes it hard for them to balance. And then they're going to be a little worried about falling, and so then they might not move. So always be thinking, what's the constraint? What's the interaction on the movement behavior that I might observe? Can I understand why I'm seeing it? All right, remember I said we weren't going to do the endocrine system, okay? Because there's too much stuff going on. We've got to pick out the key bits. I want to do just a little bit about the nervous system because we've already talked about this idea of windows of opportunity. So initially, genes dictate how the nervous system develops, but then we start to see in young children that the environment, the opportunities they have to move, influence which synapses are made between which parts of the brain, which cells of the brain. All right, so that's the key for those fundamental skills, that window of opportunity. There's a point in time when their brain can best make those connections so that the skill becomes competent. Kind of talked about that already. Most of the brain cells are in place at birth. So the growth in size of the brain is due to the wiring, not more brain cells. So the neurons, the cells that are there get bigger. So my cell body here increases in size. The axon might increase in length. Start to lay down myelin, depending on the type of nerve it is. And then the really key bit is we start to make these connections between dendrites and axon. So learning increases synaptic connections up until about 10, we said, and then we start to see pruning of the ones that don't get used very much. So the more I can introduce them to. And this is tricky for me because I was a dancer and a gymnast, and generally you've got a better chance of being a good dancer or a good gymnast if that's what you do from the age of 3 or 4 or 5. Unlike football, where you can't really play football at the age of 3, 4, or 5, you get the opportunity to do lots of other things. The better idea is to not have your child do just one thing. They should have a range of different movement experiences, at least until they're 8, 9, or 10. And as I say, that doesn't happen sometimes. But that's the best thing. They should swim, they should go to the ballet, they should go throw balls around in the park, they should run, they should catch balls, they should balance, they should climb. Let's see, what do we need here? Cerebral cortex is where your motor and your sensory cortex are, right? They develop, they get more functional, they start to talk to each other. Myelination continues up to 4 or 5 at least on the motor nerves. So part of the reason very young children and much older adults look a little slower or can't react to things quite as quickly is because the actual signal from the brain takes longer to get to the muscle than it does for you. Once the myelination is in place, it can increase the speed of the signal up to 150 times. So while that myelination, you watch a 2-year-old move versus a 4-year-old move, there's quite a lot of difference. And part of that is the development of the nervous system. So direction of myelination tends to follow our laws. So what are our laws? What are the 2 main directional laws we talked about? No, not biomechanics, directional development. That's that one. What's the top to toe one? Proximo-distal is from the midline out. What's the one from the top down? Cephalocaudal, cephalocaudal over here, cephalocaudal in England, yes, right? So we also we don't just see that with the skeleton. Remember with the pictures of the baby, we can see big growth of the head and very little growth in the toes, right? We see a similar situation with the nervous system and the myelination of the motor nerves. So that means that the children can move and have control over movements in their trunk, or from the top down before they get control of movements out here. It's one of the reasons why when you're teaching catching, you see this going on, right? Because from a neural development point of view, the fingers aren't reacting quickly enough to catch a ball yet. So I'm going to use the bit that I can move the fastest. Okay? As we get older, then we start to lose neurons, we start to lose synapses, we cut those away. We also start to lose levels of the chemical molecules that are responsible to help the signal from the brain to the muscles. And myelin starts to break down. So we get this like triple whammy going on as we get older. I'm going to get slower because I'm losing type 2 muscle fibers and I'm having to rely on type 1s. I'm also going to get slower because the signal from the brain to the muscle is going to travel slower. One theory, people are really interested in looking at what happens as people get older. And so one of the theories says that maybe if you lose a neuron or the synapse connection stops working or it deteriorates, then you have to detour around that part in the system that's not working properly, and that slows you down. But we do know that in older adults who are physically active, we see less decline in movement. We also see improved cognitive function. So they're sharper, they're a little more alert, they're more interested in what's going on, all of which feeds into quality of life for older people. It's not a biology class. So, why are we doing development of systems in the body? Right? What's the impact of what we see going on in the systems on the movement that I'm going to see that person do? Right? That's the key. That's what you're looking for. Right? This is just a set of constraints on my triangle, and if I change a constraint, I change the movement behavior that I'm going to see. That's the key. So sometimes I can change the constraint. I can't really change someone's skeleton. I can't directly change someone's nervous system, although I can provide experiences that their nervous system would adapt to. I can change people's muscular system if I train them properly and I give them the right kinds of exercises and the right kinds of diet. So what can I do with that information to change the movement that I'm seeing? Right? If I want to make this person better at a skill, is there anything in there that helps me understand how to do that? That's what you want to pay attention to. Right? It's not an anatomy class, it's not a child development class, but the system's developing impact movement. That's all there is to it. All right? Question. Okay, don't forget, go sign up.